Anna, 23, 7 months pregnant and widowed, gave a free slice of apple pie to a stranded, freezing Hell's Angel. It was an act of pure kindness. Her manager, a petty, cruel man, repaid that kindness by slapping her across the face and firing her. What he didn't know was that the biker's entire club was watching from across the highway. In the next 10 minutes, Anna would be adopted by an army, and Mr. Bradley would learn what happens when you pick the wrong pregnant woman to abuse. Before we dive deeper into a story that will shake your faith in the system but restore it in humanity, I need to know, where are you watching this from? What corner of the world are you in right now? Drop your city and your country in the comments below. Let's see how far this beacon of hope can truly travel. Your voice matters. Help us get this channel to 1,000 subscribers. God bless you for joining the family. This is a story about Anna, and you need to listen, because Anna, at 23 years old, was the living embodiment of innocence trapped in a collapsing world. She was 7 months pregnant, carrying the only thing her late husband Tom had left her. Tom was a good man, a mechanic who knew his way around a transmission, but a freak industrial accident 6 months prior had stolen him, leaving Anna with a mountain of medical debt and a future that looked as bleak and gray as the Ohio sky. She was a widow before she was even truly a wife, and soon she would be a mother. She was drowning, but she was doing it with a quiet, heartbreaking grace. Her world was the Gus's Pioneer Diner, a 24-hour box of neon and regrets stuck to the side of the interstate near Toledo. This diner was her prison and her only paycheck. Before we dive deeper into Anna's fight, I need to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city and your country in the comments right now. Let's see how far this story travels. This place, this Rust Belt relic, smelled of burnt coffee and the kind of despair that sinks into your bones, a place where dreams came to die. Anna was the only light in it, and that light was starting to flicker. Anna worked double shifts, her ankles swelling to the size of softballs, her back a constant screaming ache, but she never complained. She smiled at the surly truckers, refilled the coffee cups of the graveyard shift workers, and moved with a careful slowness, one hand always resting on her stomach, protecting her unborn child. Every crumpled dollar bill stuffed into her apron pocket was a prayer. It was formula. It was rent. It was one more day she could keep her head above the water, one more day she could keep the lights on in the tiny, cold apartment she used to share with Tom. Her goodness was a stubborn, defiant thing. In a world that had given her nothing but pain, she responded with kindness. She was utterly alone. Her own family was gone, and Tom's, shattered by their son's death, had drifted away, lost in their own grief. Ex-Season Island. The other waitresses were too scared of losing their own jobs to offer more than a sympathetic glance. She was the perfect victim, isolated, vulnerable, and desperate, and the universe, it seemed, was not done testing her. She was a lamb, surrounded by wolves, holding on to her belief that people were, at their core, good. She represented the absolute purity that this cynical world loves to crush. She didn't ask for handouts. She didn't rail against the injustice of her fate. She just worked. She worked until her body screamed, driven by the primal, powerful love for the child she hadn't even met. Her innocence wasn't naivety. It was a choice. It was the decision to remain soft in a world that demanded she be hard. She was the kind of person who would apologize to you if you bumped into her, the kind of soul who still believed in please and thank you. She was a ghost in her own life, just trying to survive. The atmosphere at Gus's was one of total desolation. The cracked vinyl booths had seen better decades. Fluorescent lights hummed a mournful, buzzing tune. It was a purgatory for the forgotten, a pit stop for people on their way to nowhere. For Anna, this was her entire battlefield. This was where she was making her last stand against homelessness, fighting for her child's future with a coffee pot in one hand and a stack of menus in the other. Her vulnerability was a neon sign visible to everyone, yet ignored by all. The diner was a microcosm of the American Rust Belt's decay. Promises broken, factories shuttered, and people like Anna left behind. She would count her tips at the end of the night, her fingers trembling from exhaustion. Sometimes it wasn't enough. Sometimes after paying for the bus ride home, she'd be left with just a few dollars. On those nights, she'd skip dinner, telling herself the baby had already eaten. She would sit in the dark of her apartment, rubbing her belly and whispering promises to her son. "It's okay," she'd murmur. "Mommy's got this. I've got you." But she was terrified. She knew she was one bad shift, one flat tire, one sick day away from complete and total ruin. The system, the one designed to catch people like her, was a cruel joke. She had applied for assistance, for survivor benefits, for housing. The answer was always the same. "You're on a waiting list. We need more paperwork. These things take time." But Anna didn't have time. The bank didn't care about waiting lists. The electric company didn't care about paperwork. She was falling through the cracks, and no one was reaching out a hand to stop her. She was invisible. The bureaucracy was just another wall she couldn't climb, another door slammed in her face. Her desolation was a physical weight. You could see it in the slope of her shoulders and the dark circles under her eyes. Yet she persisted. She would wipe down the sticky counters, arranging the sugar packets into perfect, neat rows. This small act of order in a life of chaos was her only control. She was a good person, a truly good person, being ground down by a world that didn't value goodness. She was utterly defenseless. She was the quiet, forgotten casualty of a hard world, a whisper of a woman just trying to hold on long enough to bring a new life into it, and that was the tragedy. Her kindness was her only shield. But in this world, kindness is often mistaken for weakness. The forces of oppression, the small, petty tyrannies of the world feed on weakness. They see a person like Anna not as someone to be protected, but as someone to be exploited. She was alone, she was broke, she was exhausted, and the predator was already circling, watching her from the shadows of the diner's back office, waiting for his moment to strike. He was the diner manager, Mr. Bradley, and he saw her vulnerability not as a burden, but as an opportunity. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of cold, driving November rain that turns the world into a gray watercolor smear. The diner was nearly empty, a graveyard of silent booths. The clock ticked past 9 p.m. That's when the bell above the door didn't jingle. It crashed open. A wall of cold, wet night air blasted into the warm, stale diner, and with it, a man who seemed carved from the storm itself. He was a giant. He filled the doorway, blocking the flickering neon sign, a silhouette of dripping leather and denim. He was, in every sense of the word, terrifying. He wore the full colors of the Hell's Angels. The winged death's head on his back seemed to stare down the entire room. His name, sewn onto the leather vest, was Grizz, and he looked the part. His beard was a tangled, rain-matted mess, his face a roadmap of hard miles and harder choices. Tattoos crawled from under his collar and covered his knuckles. He was the monster that parents told their kids about, the living, breathing boogeyman of the American highway. The few patrons in the diner immediately glued their eyes to their plates. This wasn't a costume bought at a mall. This was earned. This was a statement of allegiance to a brotherhood that the rest of the world looked upon with pure, unadulterated fear. He moved with a pained, heavy gait, the water pooling around his biker boots. He wasn't aggressive. Not yet. He was exhausted. You see, his Harley, his iron lifeline, had sputtered and died 3 miles back on the shoulder of I-75. He was stranded, cold to the bone, and separated from his charter, who were waiting for him at a rendezvous point. He was a king without his throne, a warrior without his horse. He slumped onto a stool at the counter, the vinyl groaning in protest. He peeled off his soaked gloves, revealing knuckles like walnuts, scarred and tattooed. A faded Semper Fi tattoo was visible on his forearm, a relic from a different war, a different life. He was a man who had seen combat in the deserts of Afghanistan and on the blacktops of America. He was hard through and through. He represented everything that Anna's quiet life was not. He was the chaos to her order. The air grew thick with his silent, brooding presence. Anna, her heart hammering against her ribs, did the only thing she knew how to do, her job. She grabbed a coffee pot, her hand trembling slightly. She instinctively kept one hand on her belly, a subconscious shield. "Coffee, sir?" she asked, her voice small but steady. He was by far the most intimidating customer she had ever served. She could smell the rain, the leather, and the faint metallic scent of his motorcycle engine on him. He was the outside world, raw and unfiltered. Grizz didn't even look at her. He just nodded, a curt, sharp gesture. "Black," he growled, his voice like gravel rattling in a can. He was humiliated. He was the leader, and he was stuck. He discreetly checked the worn wallet chained to his belt. Inside sat a single crumpled $5 bill and some loose change. It was a disaster. He was hungry. He was frozen, and he was, for all intents and purposes, broke. He couldn't even afford a real meal. He stared at the menu plastered on the wall, but he wasn't reading it. He was doing math. The coffee was $2.50. He could afford that and still leave a $2 tip. But the hunger was a hollow ache in his gut. He'd been riding for 10 hours straight. His eyes, against his will, drifted to the pie case, where a beautiful golden-crusted apple pie sat warming under a heat lamp. It represented a warmth and comfort that felt a million miles away. He quickly looked away, his pride stinging. Anna poured the coffee, her hand shaking just enough to rattle the cup in the saucer. As she set it down in front of him, her fear began to fade, replaced by something else. Observation. She saw him. Not the vests, not the patches, but the man. She saw the deep, bone-weary exhaustion in his eyes. She saw the way his calloused hands trembled, not from rage, but from the freezing cold. She saw the way he looked at that pie with a primal, desperate longing. And in that moment, he wasn't a monster. He wasn't an outlaw. He was just a man. A cold, hungry, stranded man. He looked, she realized, just as defeated as she felt every single morning when she woke up. He was just another soul beaten down by the road, just like her. Her empathy, the purest part of her, override her fear. She recognized his brand of suffering. It was a different flavor from her own, but it was suffering nonetheless. She made a choice. It was a small, quiet rebellion. It was an act of profound and foolish kindness. Her manager, Bradley, had a strict no free food ever policy. He would dock her pay for a mistaken order. But as she looked at this mountain of a man who seemed so broken, she found she just didn't care about Bradley. She didn't care about the rules. She saw a human being who needed help. So she turned her back to the office camera. She grabbed a clean plate. She cut the single largest slice of apple pie from the case. It was perfect, packed with cinnamon and apples, the crust flaky. She slid it into the microwave for 15 seconds, just enough to make the steam rise. It was an act of pure, unadulterated grace, a beacon of light in the cynical, dying diner. This tiny act was a revolution against the cruelty of her world. She walked back to him. He looked up, surprised, as she placed the plate gently on the counter next to his coffee. He looked at the pie, then at her, his eyes narrowed in confusion. He hadn't ordered this. He couldn't pay for this. He was about to tell her to take it back, his pride stinging. On the house, Anna whispered, offering him the first genuine, tired smile she'd had all night. You look like you need something warm. It's a real cold night out there. She pushed the plate an inch closer to him. Grizz stared at her. This ... girl, this pregnant, exhausted wisp of a thing who looked like the world had been kicking her since the day she was born, was showing. _him_kindness. Him, a man who made people cross the street. A man who, by his own admission, was not always good. He looked at her swollen belly. He looked at her worn-out shoes. He looked at her smile. He was, in a word, shattered. This tiny, broke, pregnant waitress who had nothing had just given him her best. In his world, everything was transactional. Respect was earned with fists. Loyalty was proven with blood. But this was something else. This was grace. It was a purity he hadn't encountered in decades. It hit him with the force of a physical blow. He felt an emotion so foreign he almost couldn't name it. Gratitude. He couldn't speak. His throat was too thick. He, a hardened veteran, a man who hadn't cried when he was shot, felt his eyes burn. He just nodded. It was a deep, slow, reverent nod. A promise. An oath. A debt had just been incurred. And in his world, debts are always paid. He picked up the fork and took a bite of the pie. And in that cold, miserable diner, it tasted like absolution. But this sacred moment of human connection was being watched. In the cramped, windowless back office, the grainy black and white image on the CCTV monitor captured it all. Mr. Bradley, the diner manager, sat hunched over his desk, his eyes narrowed. Bradley was a man fermented in his own failures. He was a small-town tyrant, a man whose only joy in life came from wielding his tiny, insignificant power over those he deemed weaker. And Anna was his favorite target. He didn't see kindness in her act. Saw _insubordination _ he saw his property being given away. To Bradley, Anna's goodness was a personal affront. It was a silent judgment on his own petty, miserable existence. He hated her for it. He hated her for her youth, for her pregnancy, and for the shred of dignity she clung to despite his best efforts to grind it out of her. This slice of pie was the last straw. It was anarchy. It was _his diner, and she was _his employee, and he was going to reestablish the hierarchy of pain that he so desperately needed to feel powerful. He practically salivated, waiting for the biker to leave. He was a coward, after all. Grizz finished the last bite. He felt ... human. He looked at Anna, placed a crumpled $20 bill on the counter, all the gas money he had. For the coffee, he said, his voice a low rumble of genuine gratitude. He didn't mention the pie. They both knew this was about more than pie. He nodded, a gesture of profound respect, and walked out into the rain, the bell jingling his departure. Anna, tears welling in her eyes, saw the $20. It was hope. It was a lifeline. That hope lasted for 4 seconds. The moment the door clicked shut, the back office door flew open. Bradley stormed out, his face a blotchy, furious red. He marched directly to Anna, who instinctively took a step back, clutching the $20 bill. "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a pathetic, manufactured rage. He was practically vibrating. He saw the money in her hand, and his eyes lit up with a sick, greedy justification. "Oh, I see," he sneered, jabbing a filthy finger at her. "You're not just giving away my inventory, you're a thief. You're running your own little side hustle, giving my food to that _filth _BT for a big tip." He was loud, performing for the other patrons, establishing his narrative. "You're stealing from me, you ungrateful little ... double quotes." He spat the words, enjoying the terror blooming on her face. "No," Anna pleaded, tears of fear and humiliation streaming down her face. "No, Mr. Bradley, he was so cold ... his bike broke down. I didn't ask for that." She held up the $20 as proof, but in his twisted logic, it was her condemnation. She was backed against the coffee machine, trapped. The few remaining patrons stared, frozen. The cook in the back suddenly found the grill intensely interesting. The system of silence was working perfectly. "You're pathetic," Bradley screamed, his voice cracking. "You're incompetent. You're nothing." He was drunk on his own power, high on her terror. He felt like a giant. He saw her flinch, and it delighted him. He wanted to break her. And then he did the one thing that changed everything. He raised his hand. "You're fired." he yelled, and as he said it, he slapped her. It wasn't a small tap. It was a full, open-handed, violent strike across her face. The sound was sharp and sickening. _crack_ that echoed through the silent diner like a gunshot. Anna cried out a sharp gasp of shock and pain. She stumbled backward, crashing into the cutlery tray, spoons and forks clattering to the floor. Her hands flew, not to her stinging red cheek, but to her belly, a desperate, primal, maternal instinct to protect her child from the impact. She stared at Bradley, her eyes wide with terror, the world dissolving into a blur of tears and humiliation. Bradley stood over her, his chest heaving. He saw her. Terror, and it felt like victory. Get your things and get out. You're trespassing? Anna, sobbing, fumbled for her cheap phone and dialed 911. This was what you were supposed to do. The police were the safe institution. They were the good guys. They would help her. She reported the assault, her voice trembling as Bradley scoffed and folded his arms, waiting for them. He knew how this game was played. 2 officers from the Ohio State Highway Patrol arrived 10 minutes later. They walked in with the heavy, tired sighs of men who had seen it all and were impressed by nothing. They saw a weeping, pregnant waitress on the floor and a manager tapping his foot. To them, this wasn't a crime scene. It was a Tuesday night inconvenience. What's the problem here? The older one asked, his hand resting on his belt, his eyes already bored. Bradley immediately launched into his story. Officer, thank God. This employee, Anna, has been stealing from the register. When I confronted her, she flew into a hysterical rage. She started throwing things, and when I tried to stop her, she tripped and fell. He pointed at the scattered cutlery. She's, he lowered his voice. Pregnant, hormonal. I just want her removed from my property. Anna, in disbelief, tried to speak. He hit me. He slapped me. Ask them, she cried, pointing to the other patrons. The patrons suddenly couldn't meet their eyes. They didn't want to get involved. The officers looked at each other. Ma'am, did he punch you? No, he slapped me. Do you require medical attention? No, I just, he hit me. The officer sighed. Ma'am, this is she said, it's a civil matter. Your word against his. There's no crime here. Our hands are tied, but my job, Anna whispered, the realization crushing her. That's between you and him, ma'am, the officer said, now impatient. He's the manager. This is his property. He wants you to leave, so you have to leave, or we'll have to arrest _you for trespassing. The system wasn't just failing her. It was actively taking the side of her abuser. The badge, her symbol of safety, was being used to eject her. They escorted her to the door. The officers pushed her gently out the door and into the freezing rain. They got back in their warm car and drove away. Anna stood there, her thin uniform soaked in seconds, the rain mixing with her tears. She was unemployed. She was assaulted. She was penniless. And the police, her only hope, had just legitimized her attacker and abandoned her on the side of a highway. This was the true bottom, the absolute soul-crushing despair of realizing you are completely and utterly alone. She fumbled for her phone again, her fingers numb. She found the corporate office number on a sticker on the diner window. She called. It rang and finally clicked to a cold, pre-recorded voice. Thank you for calling Pioneer Diners, LLC. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Please leave a message. She was sobbing into a void. The system didn't even have a person to ignore her with. It was just a machine. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment was miles away. The bus had stopped running. She was standing in a puddle, her hand on her stomach as cars sped past, spraying her with dirty road water. She was invisible. The system, the police, the corporate structure, society itself had failed her at every conceivable level. They had not only ignored her plight, they had blamed her for it. This was the moral vacuum. This was the moment where justice dies. But Bradley, back inside his warm diner, wiping down the counter with a smug look on his face, had made one fatal miscalculation. He didn't know that Grizz hadn't been traveling alone. He was just the scout. Had broken down, yes, but he had been on his way to meet his charter. They had been waiting for him, parked in the shadows of an abandoned gas station across the highway, wondering what was taking their road. Captain so long. The diner, with its massive plate glass window, was a brightly lit stage in the dark, rainy night. They hadn't heard the words. They didn't need to. They had seen the entire horrifying play. They saw Bradley's spittle-flecked rage. They saw him raise his hand, and they saw the sickening, unmistakable impact. They saw Anna fall. They saw her hands fly to her belly, and in that instant, a call went out. It wasn't a phone call. It was the simultaneous, deafening ignition of 20 Harley-Davidson engines, a sound of judgment that sounded like God himself had just cracked his knuckles. The sound hit first. It wasn't just noise, it was a physical concussion. It was the simultaneous, deafening ignition of 20 Harley-Davidson V-twin engines. A sound that wasn't a roar, but a underscore judgment, underscore. It was a guttural, earth-shaking promise of retribution that tore through the quiet Ohio night, a biblical thunderclap that announced the arrival of an old, forgotten God. The rain itself seemed to sizzle and evaporate on the hot pipes. Inside the diner, Bradley wiping down the counter with a smug little smile, froze. He thought it was thunder. Then the floor began to vibrate. The coffee cups on the shelf began to rattle, a high-pitched tink-tink-tinking that grew into a violent clatter. The windows hummed, vibrating in their frames. "What in the hell?" Bradley stammered, his smile vanishing. Then the world turned white. The entire diner was instantly, blindingly illuminated by the high beams of 20 motorcycles. They weren't just in the parking lot. They were swarming it, a tidal wave of chrome and steel. They aimed their lights directly through the windows, turning the diner into a stark, merciless interrogation room. Bradley stumbled to the window, shielding his eyes. His face, just moments ago so proud, turned the color of waxy, spoiled milk. He wasn't looking at motorcycles. He was looking at an army was a river of polished chrome and wet, black leather and occupying force. They didn't just park. They moved with a terrifying, unspoken precision, forming a perfect, menacing semicircle around the front door, cutting off all escape. Each bike, a glittering 900-pound beast of American iron, was a soldier falling into rank. Then, as one, the engines cut. The sudden, absolute silence that fell was 1,000 times more terrifying than the noise. The diner was plunged back into its dim, fluorescent gloom, and in that void, the only sound thwack, 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 20 kickstands hitting the wet asphalt, perfect, militant unison. It was the sound of cavalry dismounting. It was the sound of an invasion beginning. The few patrons left inside scrambled under their tables, one of them whispering hysterically into a phone. Outside, Anna saw them. Still standing in the rain, soaked to the bone, she saw the winged skull patches. She shrank back. She thought they were here for her. Had she done something wrong? Was she in trouble for the pie? Her world had so thoroughly abandoned her that she couldn't even recognize her saviors. She was terrified of them. She tried to hide in the shadows by the dumpster, her body racked with sobs and shivers. She was a lamb, surrounded by what she thought were wolves. The diner door swung open. Grizz entered first. He was no longer the cold, defeated man who had eaten pie. His exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, controlled, righteous fury. He was a general. His eyes, like chips of ice, scanned the room, cataloging everything, the patrons under the tables, the cook frozen by the grill, and the pathetic, trembling manager. And behind him, one by one, filed 19 other men, each one a carbon copy of his size, his intensity, his leather-clad menace. They didn't rush. They occupied. They moved with the heavy, deliberate, and terrifying purpose of a highly trained military unit. The air in the small diner became thick, heavy, and impossible to breathe. They were a wall of wet leather, road grime, and pure, unadulterated intimidation. They said nothing. They just entered. They filled every available space. A silent, disciplined force that radiated an almost visible aura of danger. The diner, Bradley's little kingdom, had just been conquered. Bradley was pinned. He was backed against the stainless steel grill. His escape routes cut off by 300-pound men who looked like they ate people like him for breakfast. He was trembling, hyperventilating, a thin sheen of cold sweat on his face. What is this? He stammered, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "We, we're closed. You have to leave." The bikers didn't even look at him. Their silence was his verdict. The patrons were filming, their phones shaking in their hands. "It's a gang," one whispered. "A biker gang. They're gonna rob the place. Where are the cops?" The irony was sickening. The police, the safe institution, had abandoned the victim, and now the gang, the danger, was the only justice left. The world had been turned upside down. The men who lived by a code were here to correct the men who lived by none. But the bikers ignored Bradley. They ignored the patrons. Their first move was not for the villain. It was for the victim. Grizz jerked his chin toward the door. Two of the largest bikers, men with sergeant-at-arms patches, immediately moved back outside into the storm. Anna, seeing them approach, cried out, thinking they were going to hurt her. She flinched, bracing for another blow. Instead, they moved with a surprising, almost paternal gentleness. They didn't grab her. One biker took off his own leather vest, his colors, his sacred honor, and wrapped it around her shoulders, shielding her from the rain. "You're safe now, ma'am," he rumbled. The other biker gently took her by the arm. "Come on inside. You're catching your death out here." They guided her, confused and shaking, back into the warmth of the diner. The wall of bikers parted like the Red Sea. They let her pass, this small, pregnant, trembling woman now wearing a Hell's Angels vest 10 sizes too big for her. And as soon as she was behind their line, they reformed. It was a living, breathing, unbreachable wall, a fortress of leather and muscle. They had placed themselves between the predator and his prey. Bradley was on one side, trembling. Anna was on the other, protected. This was the moment, the great inversion. The threat was not a threat at all. It was a shield. The men the world called monsters were the only angels in the room. Anna, looking at the broad, patched backs of the men surrounding her, finally understood. They weren't here to hurt her. They were here _for her. This army, this entire terrifying army, was hers. Grizz, his movements calm and deliberate, stepped forward. He walked slowly, his boots heavy on the linoleum, until he was 6 inches from Bradley's face. The manager was a foot shorter and 100 pounds lighter. He had to crane his neck to look up at the biker who was radiating a cold, dangerous energy. Bradley, sobbing, had wet himself. A dark stain spread across the front of his beige trousers. Grizz didn't yell. He didn't have to. He spoke in that low, gravelly voice that cut through the silence like a razor. You hit her. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. It was a death sentence. No, Bradley shrieked, his voice breaking. No, I didn't. She fell. She was stealing. I'm the manager. He was blubbering, snot and tears running down his face. The small tyrant, so brave when assaulting a pregnant woman, had dissolved into the pathetic, cowardly puddle he had always been. His power was a costume, and it had just been ripped off. Grizz just stared at him, his face an unreadable mask of cold contempt. He let the man's pathetic sobs echo in the silent room. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't have to. The terror he was projecting was a far greater weapon. The shift in power was absolute, a tectonic plate realigning. The bully was now the prey, and the lions were encircling him, their patience wearing thin. If you believe that true strength is measured by who you protect, not by who you bully. Smash that like button. Your engagement proves that the world is hungry for this kind of justice. The kind that doesn't wear a suit and tie. The silence stretched. Grizz let Bradley marinate in his own terror. He wanted him to understand. He wanted him to feel the same helplessness that Anna had felt. He wanted him to know that the police were not coming. He wanted him to know that the corporate office could not save him. He wanted him to know that his safe world, his system, was a fiction. This was the flood of justice. It wasn't about violence. It was about _presence _. It was about scale. It was about showing this small, cruel man that his actions had consequences, and that those consequences had just walked in the door wearing leather. The bikers hadn't touched him, but they had already destroyed him. The confrontation was a trial, a verdict, and a sentencing all in one. Grizz looked down at the weeping, pathetic manager. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't need to. His presence, and the presence of the 19 men behind him, was the judgment. You put your hands on her, Grizz stated, his voice a low, gravelly engine of pure contempt. You humiliated her, and then you called the cops to throw her out. He leaned in, and Bradley could smell the rain, the road, and the leather. The police were a system. We are a consequence. Bradley just sobbed, his small, cruel world utterly dissolved. His humiliation was absolute. A public unmaking in front of the very patrons he used to terrorize. But this wasn't enough. Bradley's terror was satisfying, but it didn't solve Anna's problem. Justice had to be permanent. The biker next to Grizz, the one with the road captain patch, pulled out a smartphone. He wasn't a brute. He was a tactician. He looked at the small framed business license on the wall. He dialed the number listed for the franchise owner. He put the call on speakerphone. The entire diner listened as it rang. A digital death knell. A sleepy, annoyed voice finally answered from 1,000 miles away. Gus's Diner, corporate, how can I good evening? The road captain's voice boomed, sharp, clear, and professional. My name is not important. What is important is that we are the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. We are currently all 20 of us at your Toledo, Ohio location. We have just witnessed and recorded your on-duty manager, Mr. Bradley, physically assault his 7 months pregnant employee, Anna. The line was dead silent. We also witnessed the local police refuse to file a report. We, however, are not leaving until this is resolved. You could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The sound of a man waking up to a corporate nightmare. What do you want? The owner stammered. We're not negotiating, the captain said coldly. You have 60 seconds to remove Mr. Bradley from his position, or our next call is to the Toledo Blade and every local news station. We have the videos. Your brand will be synonymous with woman beater by sunrise. Bradley. The owner shrieked through the speakerphone, his voice high and panicked. Bradley, are you there? You're fired. You're fired. Get your personal effects and get off my property. You're done. We will cooperate with the police fully. Just leave. Bradley let out a strangled, inhuman howl. It was the sound of a man's entire life end, broadcast for everyone to hear. This was the true Caterus. The system, when confronted by a power it couldn't bully, didn't just bend, it shattered. Just then the police cruisers reappeared, sirens blazing. The patrons had called them again, reporting a biker gang takeover. The 2 officers burst in, hands on their weapons, expecting a massacre. Instead, they found a bizarrely peaceful scene. Bradley sobbing in a puddle of his own urine. Anna surrounded by a silent wall of protective giants. Grizz turned to the lead officer, his face calm. It's all handled, officer. The owner fired him. We were just waiting for you. This man, he pointed to Bradley, assaulted this woman. We are the witnesses. All 20 of us. And we all have it on video. The officers, faced with overwhelming evidence, and 20 men who were clearly not backing down, made a very different calculation this time. Their hands were suddenly untied. "Sir, you're coming with us," the older cop said to Bradley, pulling him to his feet and cuffing him. The system, exposed and shamed, was finally forced to do its job. Bradley was dragged out, his reign of petty terror over. His last sight, the cold, unforgiving eyes of the bikers who had replaced him at the top of the food chain. With the threat gone, the entire atmosphere in the diner shifted. The tension broke, but the mission was not complete. The villain was gone, but the victim was not yet whole. Anna was safe, but she was still unemployed, still broke, still facing eviction. Grizz, the giant who had been moved by a simple act of kindness, turned to her. His face, so hard and terrifying seconds before, softened with a profound paternal gentleness. He took off his own helmet, a scuffed black piece of fiberglass that had seen thousands of miles of road. He reached into his own wallet, passed the gas money, and pulled out a crisp, folded $100 bill. He dropped it into the helmet. "This woman," he announced to the diner, his voice echoing, "showed us honor when we were low. She's family now. This is for the baby." One by one, every single biker in that room walked past Anna. They were not rich men. They were mechanics, veterans, construction workers, but they understood debt. They emptied their wallets. Wads of 20s, 10s, 100s, a cascade of green paper filling the helmet. Then they passed the helmet to the other patrons, the ones who had hidden, the ones who had stayed silent. Shamed and inspired, they bought back their own consciences. They added their own 5s, 10, 20s. The cook emerged from the kitchen, shyly emptying the entire tip jar. The helmet was overflowing. It was heavy. It was $3,800. It was rent. It was medical bills. It was a crib. It was breathing room. It was freedom. Grizz knelt in front of her. This massive, intimidating man, covered in leather and ink, got down on one knee. He was a knight before his queen. He presented the helmet not as charity, but as a _debt paid _. "This is from your family," he rumbled, his voice thick with emotion. "You are not alone. Not ever again." He gave her the vest the other biker had wrapped her in. "You keep this. It's a promise." She was no longer just Anna. She was a woman protected by the Hell's Angels. The moral of this story is not complicated. It's etched in chrome and paid for in leather. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's not a cop's badge or a manager's title. Courage is seeing a cold, hungry stranger and offering him a slice of pie when you have nothing left to give. And true family isn't the blood you're born with. It's the people who ride through a storm, who face down the system, and who stand as a wall to protect you when the world has given you every reason to fall. The world is full of Bradleys, small men who get big by making others feel small, but it's also full of Grizz, men who look like monsters but act like guardians. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes are real. They don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather, and they are always watching.